Hi, Lee. Welcome to our show.
Hello, Savannah. Welcome to our show.
How's it going?
Very well. You?
Doing great. And I love when we're sitting across from each other in this way because it means we have a guest.
It does mean that.
Which is thrilling. Typically, we're in a different setup where we're sitting across from each other. So it's always good news when we're next to each other.
Yes.
Today, we have Jacob Mchangama on the show to talk about a very light subject, free speech.
Welcome, Jacob.
Welcome to the show.
Much.
Yeah.
Typically, we like to start the show by asking if there's anything that you've been reading or watching or listening to lately. And there's no judgment if you're watching Bravo reality TV. In fact, it would make me like you even more. What are you getting into lately?
I am reading, I like to read a lot of different stuff, but right now I am reading a lot of Stoicism, letters from a Stoic, Seneca, combined with a great book about the history of Europe from Napoleon up until the Cold War by a historian called David Thompson, which is really, really good.
Amazing.
And then I've been binge watching because I've been traveling, second season of The Agency, if you've watched
Thank God you're watching some TV because I was about to say.
That's a great show.
He's intellectual.
I'm more interested in the Stoicism.
I knew you were going to love the Stoicism.
All right,
Go ahead.
What do you think of yourself as a Stoic?
No, the full package is, it's culturally quite removed from our daily lives. But there's a lot of, and I'm thinking of Stoicism, especially in terms of the topic that we're talking about today, free speech, because there's a lot of wisdom in there on how you navigate free speech as an ethical framework. Well, if you read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, the emperor is like the most powerful man in the world when he lived, and he talks about the importance of free speech, freedom, about suffering insults and so on. But there's also an ethical framework around sort of saying, well, you don't have to identify with what other people say about you. And I think in a social media world, that's actually quite good. That's a necessary skill, and one that also mitigates the need for, regulation if more people are able to sort of zoom out and say, okay, if you think I'm an idiot, that doesn't mean I'm necessarily an idiot.
I was rereading Epictetus's Enchiridion just yesterday, precisely because I needed to remind myself that it's okay if other people are angry with you.
Yes.
And you don't have to have an opinion about it.
Exactly.
And
I think there you can, if you think people who make criticism of you are acting in good faith, then it might be a good idea to actually try and be objective about as well. Maybe they have a point.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe they have a point that you've missed, and so you can learn from it. But if you find that it's just gratuitously offensive, then you can just zoom out and do your best to ignore it.
Have a healthy detachment from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, you reading?
It's reminding me, Lee recommended that I read the book, The Courage to be Disliked. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but I read that last year because of you, because I don't like when people don't like me.
I didn't know you'd read it. That's good.
Yeah. Gosh, I read it in like a couple of days. I don't know. Am I less codependent? I don't know. But yeah, it's like a healthy detachment, being able to take feedback from people, and when it's in good faith, to be able to say, okay, what might be true about this, while still maintaining my own sense of identity. But then simultaneously wrestling with the fact that, especially with social media, sometimes people are just jerks. Like even this week, episode that we had a couple of weeks ago has gotten some traction on social media, and Mary Evelyn runs a lot of our socials. And a couple of guys had put an animated GIF towards me that just said, "Shut up." And I was like, okay. And, you kind of have to move on. But having a show like this does help you get more detached, I think, from some of that feedback.
Yeah.
What about you, Lee? What are you learning /reading?
You do realize there are idiots in the world, at least.
Some of them.
Yes. That you can have to learn to let go of.
Well, I think that there are hurting people in the world that lash out because of their own issues. Yeah.
Let's see.
Give me some brain rot, Lee. Say that you're watching something crazy.
I'm watching MASH. I don't know if I've mentioned that. Yeah, Laura and I are working back through seasons of MASH. Do you know MASH?
Yeah. It's like from the 70s?
Yeah.
Or like,
old school.
Korean War.
Korean War, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we're just slowly working through that right now.
It's of the vintage variety.
Yeah. That's right. It's interesting. I think that it gets more serious and more edgy, I think, in its social commentary as it goes on, and we're not quite there yet. And so it's still just kind of funny, as opposed to starting to have more of the kind of social critique that I think it was best at in its later years. Yeah. So, but we haven't got there yet.
With sincerity, I've never watched an episode.
Yeah. Well,
I think it just missed my time.
I don't think I've watched the full episode.
Yes, I know. What a bummer. Okay, well, on that note, let's start the show.
Hey friends, Lee here. If you enjoy our conversations at the intersection of faith, purpose, and living well, then I have the perfect podcast recommendation for you, With and For, hosted by Dr. Pam King. With and For's latest season brings together psychology and spiritual wisdom in a way that feels thoughtful, grounded, deeply human, and it's hosted by my friend Dr. Pam King, a developmental psychologist and ordained minister who offers practical guidance towards a life of thriving. I'd recommend starting with their episode featuring Parker J. Palmer, world-renowned writer, speaker, activist, Quaker elder who focuses on issues in education, spirituality, and social change. A moving and instructive conversation. Can't recommend it enough. Also, check out With and For's special summer series of wisdom practices. Released each Monday, they're short exercises shared by guests that will become a toolkit for thriving. Consider them your experiment in becoming more fully alive. So go ahead, follow With and For, hosted by Dr. Pam King, wherever you're listening now.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.
Hey everyone, today on the podcast we have Jacob Mchangama, who is the founder and executive director of the Future of Free Speech. He is a research professor at Vanderbilt University and a senior fellow at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. He has commented extensively on free speech and human rights and outlets including The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. And he has also published in academic and peer-reviewed journals including Human Rights Quarterly, Policy Review, and Amnesty International Strategic Studies. His most recent book was co-authored with Jeff Kosseff, and it is called The Future of Free Speech, Reversing the Global Decline of Democracy's Most Essential Freedom. And if you listen to this interview and you're like, wow, I really want to talk about free speech more, then we have great news for you because he is leading something called the Global Free Speech Summit here in Nashville on October 2nd to 3rd. And we're going to put the link to that in the show notes and you can get your ticket and join us there because I think Lee and I are going to go too. I really liked this conversation with Jacob and I hope you do too. Welcome to the Subtext, where we go beneath the headlines and beyond the obvious. I'm Savannah Locke.
I'm Lee Seacamp.
Hey, if you like the show, here's your official permission to gas us up. Follow, rate, and drop a review wherever you're listening now. 5 stars if you're feeling generous. We might even read your review on the show. You can watch full episodes on YouTube and Spotify. Stay connected on Instagram at The Subtext Show. You can follow me at Savannah_Locke and Lee at Lee Seacamp. Which, Jacob, do you have an Instagram? I searched.
At J. Mchangama, but I'm such a boomer that I'm mostly on Facebook.
Listen, let's do a plug for Facebook. If you want to follow Jacob, go on Facebook and find him. I love that. And if you have thoughts, questions, or hot takes, just send them our way in the DMs.
I'm also on X.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're on X as well,
yeah.
Which we will link all of Jacob's.
Which is perfect for like if you want to cultivate your stoic mindset.
The dumpster fire that is X.
Well, I mean, it's a mixed bag, I'd say. There's a lot of good stuff. There's also stuff that's less sophisticated.
Yes, totally. We will link to all of Jacob's socials and anything else in the show notes should you want to find him later. Okay, so Jacob, this is why you're here today. Because on X, Nicki Minaj did a birthday tribute to Elon Musk that I read. And she said, "Thank you for saving free speech, Elon. Happy birthday, love always from Gag City and the Barbs." I don't know what all of that means, but the free speech thing got me thinking a lot about kind of what is it? Did Elon save it? What role does X play in all of that? And then social media in general. And then I just searched the internet far and wide and realized you live so close to us and you're at Vanderbilt, which I'm only a mile away from. And so I was like, let's get Jacob on the show. So I'm so excited to have you here. I have listened to a dozen interviews with you this week. My estimation is probably 30 hours that I have spent listening to you this week.
That you'll never get back.
I did it while like working out and stuff, but you know what I mean. And one of my primary takeaways after listening to you so much this week is that free speech is really complicated.
Yeah.
And it's costly. And I think a lot of people would say, oh, free speech is good across the board. And while it may be a very good principle, it does come with costs. So talk to me a little bit about that.
I mean, I think free speech is the most important freedom that we have. But you're absolutely right in that in some ways it's a counterintuitive principle for human beings. We didn't necessarily evolve for free speech. Maybe as hunter-gatherers, free speech would have been seen as something endangering the social cohesion of your little group of people. Someone had to make decisions. You could just sit around and disagree on everything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And also we're, as human beings, are often guided more by our emotions than our reason. So on paper, most of us in a country like the United States, more or less everyone is in favor of free speech in the abstract. But when it cuts closer to the ideas and values that we really care about, most of us have a tendency to say free speech is great, but not that particular type of speech.
Right.
And that makes it very complicated to make it, for me, it's like a central part of the operating system of a free and open society. But it's an operating system that needs to be tweaked and updated in order to be continuously relevant, especially in a digital age.
Right.
So there's loads to unpack there. We'll have lots of opportunities to discuss all of that, I hope. But I would love to hear more about why have you given so much of your career to this particular issue? What's the origin of that, genealogy of that?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Copenhagen, Denmark, a very affluent, secular, liberal country. And for most of my youth, I just took free speech for granted. It was not, it's a value that had essentially been won. And then a Danish newspaper 21 years ago published cartoons of the Muslim prophet Muhammad, and suddenly Denmark became the epicenter of a global battle of values over the relationship between free speech and religion. And a lot of people who had until the day before the publication of the cartoon seen themselves as sort of, champions of Enlightenment values and so on, and who had no problem with poking fun at Christianity and, thought criticism of religion was essential, were suddenly saying, whoa, well, free speech is great, but now it's being abused to punch down on a vulnerable minority. That got me really interested in what this value means. What does it entail for a free society? What does its lack, what does its absence entail? Where does it come from? And, what should be the guiding principles? And so I've went down a rabbit hole and still finding my way around it.
2 decades later.
2 decades later, yeah.
And that experience, which you've mentioned in several interviews that I had never heard of. Had you heard of that before?
Yeah.
Okay, because you were probably an adult, right?
Yeah.
I was still in elementary school, so I didn't know what exactly was happening. But can you explain a little bit about why that for you, like what did it set off for you?
Yeah. Well, to me, it was shocking, I think, to see a lot of people who, as I said, would see themselves as against religious extremism, in favor of tolerance, open-mindedness, and so on, suddenly saying, whoa, well, there's a group here who says that they have a religious taboo, and that means that you have to respect it. And especially in the context of people wanting to use violence to uphold that religious taboo. To me, that seems very, very incompatible with any notion of a liberal, secular society that Denmark's and most Danes saw itself as. But then it sort of became part of other, and most of those who were sort of free speech, but not necessarily the cartoons were on the left. But then as power changed hands, political power in Denmark, suddenly there were people on the right who had been free speech absolutists during the cartoon affair who said, well, we need to have laws that restrict religious extremism from Muslims, for instance, because the only way to defend a free society is to crack down on extremist religious doctrines. And I said, whoa, I thought we'd just been fighting for principle, consistent free speech, and now you want to deviate from that. And that's, it's something that in my book on the history of free speech, I call Milton's curse. John Milton was an English poet, very famous, who wrote the Areopagitica, a protest, a very eloquent treatise defending press freedom and against censorship. But then when you read it more closely, you see that he's not in favor of free speech for Catholics, that he's not in favor of protecting blasphemy, that in reality, what he means by free speech is mostly mainline Protestant sects discussing amongst each other. And then the ultimate irony is that he ends up working as a censor himself under Cromwell's military dictatorship. And that's sort of a recurrent theme throughout history.
A recurring pattern that people are pro-free speech until they're in power, and then they want to restrict it for others.
Yeah, and then that they have like a selective conceptualization of what does free speech mean. And we've seen that, you can take many, take the United States. The First Amendment is ratified in 1791. In 1798, John Adams signs the Alien and Sedition Act that sends people in prison for criticizing said John Adams, and sort of it split the founders and framers, right? The greatest generations of Americans who all were adamant that free speech was, one of the values that set them apart from the British, why they needed to start out on their own. And then suddenly American politics becomes polarized, and one faction is willing to compromise.
So, what's your working definition for free speech? Your working normative definition for free speech?
So I like a sort of short, pithy statement that every, and I'm paraphrasing here, every human being has the right to think what they want and say what they think. That comes from Tacitus, but it's used also by Spinoza in his political theological treatise from 1670, which is like a very early, quite for its time, radical defense of freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and so he sees it as a natural right, and he links, the natural right to think for yourself and also to be able to express your thoughts. So he links it as a natural right, but also essential for freedom, essential for a diverse society where people with different ideas, different faiths can live together in peace. And he's talking about Amsterdam, which at the time is the most affluent, most creative city in all of Europe.
So does for you, does that assume that the essence of freedom is freedom from constraint, as opposed to, say, like in either biblical traditions or Aristotle, that freedom is the capacity to do what's good?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on whether you talk about freedom writ large or free speech. And when it comes to free speech, then the absence of constraint, especially when it comes to governments, is absolutely essential. Then you can use that freedom of speech, freedom of thought, to discuss what a wider conception of freedom, whether it is living a life in accordance with virtue, and what does that mean? But yeah, when it comes to free speech, absence of government constraints, absence of government imposed orthodoxy is essential. But it's wider than that. I would say that a culture of free speech, any strong legal protection of free speech, must almost by definition rest on a critical mass of a population also accepting that free speech is a win-win proposition. Essentially, it's the antithesis to violence, right? You know, you can live together in societies. You can have a neighbor, a spouse, friend, colleague who thinks very differently from you about religion, politics, first principles. But you can discuss your differences. You don't have to go to war. And that's revolutionary in many ways because people throughout human history have killed each other over those differences, not least in the old world, where I'm from, where religious wars for a very long time was something that scarred the continent, and where it was for a long time unimaginable that you should live in a territory where, you know, if you were a Catholic, you couldn't have Protestants, you couldn't have conversos, you couldn't have, you know, heretics who even if they said they were Catholics but didn't believe in the right Catholic way, that endangered society, and therefore they needed to be punished in various ways. And Protestants weren't much better, I hasten to say. That they were also extremely intolerant and willing to shed blood. And then, you know, you can have secular philosophies that are every bit as intolerant. You know, communism is a great example, right? That is the capital T truth that everyone must embrace. And if you don't embrace it, well, then you're going to be liquidated or end up in a gulag. Nazism, I just came back from Munich. 15 kilometers outside of Munich is Dachau, which is the first regular concentration camp that the Nazis built, and that became a model for all the others. Well, the first prisoners who were put in there were typically political prisoners, people who had, you know, who were social democrats, socialists, or even, you know, conservatives who were critical of Nazism, who had maybe made a joke about Adolf Hitler. They, you know, you'd go in a concentration camp.
Oh, okay. So something that you talk about is that we are in a free speech recession.
Yes.
Isn't that the exact word they use? Okay. So talk me through what led you to, first of all, say that. And then second of all, what are the signs, and are there psychological reasons behind that or political ones that you think have led to a recession?
Yeah, let me start in a more sort of, to provide the context, more positive.
A more positive reframe?
Yeah, well, you know, if you were to travel back in time to the the 1990s or early 2000s, the idea of a free speech recession would seem absurd, because that was a time where for several decades, free speech and democracy had been expanded to many countries that had previously not been democratic. You know, obviously you have the fall of communism, but also democracy is spread to sub-Saharan Africa. You know, the fall of apartheid in South Africa, in the 70s and 80s, South America is being democratized, and free speech was central to that development. You see that, you know, in speeches by Nelson Mandela, Václav Havel, all of these champions of freedom and democracy all point to the importance of free speech that were denied to Black South Africans, to critics of communism, and so on. And then you have in the 1990s, you have the World Wide Web, and so you have this techno optimism that, you know, any person anywhere in the world can share and access information across borders in real time, and never again will any country be able to censor anyone. In other words, that the history is over, right? It will no longer be possible to have censorship or authoritarianism, and freedom and democracy will just continue to spread. And that was sort of Bill Clinton famously said.
The Jell-O line. Oh, it got me.
he talks about how, you know, he wants China to be part of the World Trade Organization, and someone says, well, China trying to censor the internet, and he sort of laughs it off and says, good luck with that. That's like nailing Jell-O to a wall. In other words, that's completely unrealistic. And the Chinese have become rather adept at the skill of nailing Jell-O to a wall. And today, it's just a completely different world that we live in. Democracies that used to see free speech as a competitive advantage now see it as a Trojan horse that empowers the enemies of democracy, both external and domestic enemies. And I think a lot of people in democracies have also lost faith in it, partly because of social media, AI, technological developments that makes free speech feel overwhelming, threatening. We don't have the traditional gatekeepers that could filter information, and some people miss that. And also, authoritarian states have learned to use technology for their own purposes, to censor, survey at scale, in real time, in ways that Hitler and Stalin could only have dreamt of.
Yeah.
So the questions about power are really, I think, in my mind, central to all this. So let's think about, let's say, what we might call free market fundamentalism just a moment, where freedom is fundamentally understood in terms of freedom from coercion or freedom from constraint. And just as an aside, I would very much agree that freedom from coercion, freedom constraint has to be some sort of minimum in all of this. And I love your analogy of seeing best practices of free speech as analogous to a civic engagement in nonviolence.
I love that too.
Yeah, but in my mind, what I have a hard time getting my head around is that what we learn in kind of like free market fundamentalism is that people can act as if we just leave everybody free to do what they want to do in free exchange, everything will be fine. But we know that it's not fine, right? Because there are mechanisms of power, global corporations, monopolies, the cultivation of desire through marketing money. All of that stuff is creating very real pressures and very real forms of power that then impinge upon what happens in a marketplace. So it's to kind of just assert all we need is let everybody be free doesn't really get us where we want it to be, right? And we know that won't get us where we want it. So how then do you see, if we allow that with regard to free speech, that's going to work?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental difference between freedom in the conception that you just mentioned, what you call free market fundamentalism, what others might call sort of laissez-faire economics, or in the sense that, the fact that you can discuss any topic without the government stepping in does not in and of itself lead to any specific outcome or policy. It means that you can discuss it. It means that, if you have a free market system, you don't get to tell the critics of a free market system that they can't point out the flaws of that system or the injustices, real or perceived. The same way that, if you create a more interventionist economic system, you don't get to put people in prison for reading Adam Smith. So essentially it means that no one ever gets the last word and no particular idea is off the table. But there are, and this is important, limits even under the First Amendment. Like threats is a good example, right? Fraud, Samantha, if you were to send me an email and say that, you were a Nigerian princess and, if only I would...
I need $1 million.
And you defraud me, you can't hide behind the First Amendment.
Yes.
The same with incitement to imminent lawless action likely to result in such outcomes. So there are numerous restrictions. It doesn't mean that the government can't impose any limits. Mm-hmm. What's particularly important in the American free speech tradition and the free speech tradition that I am a proponent of is that, political speech writ large should be protected, that there are no specific topics where the government gets to say you can't discuss that, and that the government can't discriminate against particular viewpoints. For instance, throughout American history, there have been lots of times where the government has said, for instance, into the 50s or early 60s, you could be criminalized for being a communist. I happen to think that communism is an extremely harmful and dangerous idea once it's implemented. I don't know any example of a communist country that has been successful economically or not despotic politically. But I also think that you should be able to advocate for communism, and that there probably are people who genuinely believe that communism can be implemented in ways that will not result in gulags. I'm very skeptical about that, but I don't want to put people in gulags because they believe that you can implement communism without gulags. In fact, maybe for obvious reasons, I'm not a big believer in white supremacism, and in a state like Tennessee has a pretty ugly history. I think 1978 was the year that I was born, and it was not until 1978 that the Tennessee state constitution formally was changed to sort of repeal the prohibition on interracial marriages, for instance, even if it was unconstitutional by the time. But I would defend someone's right to be a member of the KKK and advocate for the reimposition of Jim Crow laws. I think you have a right to do that. The flip side of that is that it allows others to oppose that. So the white supremacist doesn't get by advocating that position, does not get to introduce a law against that. There are fortunately strong constitutional mechanisms by now that will prohibit that, but he gets to advocate for the idea, and I get to advocate against the idea. And I think that's the best way of regulating speech.
Yeah. Do you have a million questions?
Yep.
Or can I jump in?
You go ahead.
This is what's so fascinating. So I talked to a bunch of friends before this episode, sharing a little bit about what we were going to be talking about, just to test out like what you had said, which is that a lot of people are pro free speech until a certain boundary. And I found from my more progressive friends that it was around like the issue of like racist speech and racist like ideologies being spouted out on the internet, and some concerns around young people being indoctrinated because of the internet, or from their view at least, because of the internet, into white supremacy, and them wanting limitations around that. And I was having your voice legitimately in my head, because I've been listening so much this week, of you talking about how the counter instances will also happen, though. Like the minute that you limit someone's free speech, you're also limiting it for yourself.
Yeah.
And you used an interesting example. I can't remember the exact one, but it was of a gal who was Jewish who was protesting the Gazan genocide. Was it in Germany? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's a great example of how, like in the Christian tradition, Jesus says like the measure that you use will be used against you. It's like this very cyclical nature. And I think it's kind of true in free speech, where it's like the limits that you use will also be limited against you. So
So this is Germany, for historical reasons, has very strict restrictions on what you can say, on hate speech, Nazi symbols, and so on. They have what they call a militant democracy. And so after October 7th, they banned pro-Palestinian protests in a number of cities. And so there was this woman called Iris Hefetz, who happens to be Israeli and Jewish, who's lived in Germany for a long time. She's sort of on the far left, anti-Zionist. And she thinks that Israel's actions in Gaza constitute a genocide. And, you can agree or disagree with that viewpoint, but that's essentially a political position, right? And so she protests with a cardboard that says, "As an Israeli Jew, stop the genocide in Gaza," in Berlin, and she's arrested and detained for some hours. And that has happened 3 or 4 times by now. So you have the perverse situation where a descendant of the people that were subjected to a genocide in Germany is being censored by the descendants of those who subjected Jews to a genocide, all in the name of preventing anti-Semitism. And those are sort of the almost inevitable unintended consequences of these things. And that's why it's one of the reasons why in America it was actually Black and Jewish groups that defeated some of these hate speech bans. It was the civil rights movement that won a lot of the cases that expanded free speech. It was someone like Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Supreme Court justice who voted along with 8 other justices to uphold the free speech rights of a member of the KKK who, in front of cameras, with a bunch of his KKK bros with guns in regalia, threatened blacks and Jews, and he was actually defended by 2 ACLU staff lawyers, one of whom was Jewish, the other was Eleanor Holmes Norton, who later became a delegate to Congress for DC. And as I said, Thurgood Marshall, said, no, you can't punish someone unless it constitutes incitement to imminent lawless action that is likely to result in such outcomes. And that was not because Thurgood Marshall sympathized with the KKK. He dedicated his entire career to fighting for civil rights and against white supremacy. But he recognized something that I think is extremely important, that free speech and equality are values that are mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. Whereas a lot of people today, especially younger people, as you alluded to, tend to view free speech and equality as mutually exclusive, or at least in tension, that where they say, well, free speech, if you use it, you say racism, it's weaponized against minorities, and bad consequences will happen due to that. Thurgood Marshall and the genius of the civil rights movement was to recognize that whenever you have restrictions on free speech, they will be defined and enforced by majorities in a democracy. Outside democracies by whoever has the power. And so if you're an unpopular minority, you're only ever a majority away from being the target rather than the beneficiary of restrictions on free speech.
Hey friends, Lee here. If you enjoy our conversations at the intersection of faith, purpose, and living well, then I have the perfect podcast recommendation for you, With and For, hosted by Dr. Pam King. With and For's latest season brings together psychology and spiritual wisdom in a way that feels thoughtful, grounded, deeply human, and it's hosted by my friend Dr. Pam King, a developmental psychologist and ordained minister who offers practical guidance towards a life of thriving. I'd recommend starting with their episode featuring Parker J. Palmer, world-renowned writer, speaker, activist, Quaker elder who focuses on issues in education, spirituality, and social change. A moving and instructive conversation. Can't recommend it enough. Also, check out With and For's special summer series of wisdom practices. Released each Monday, they're short exercises shared by guests that will become a toolkit for thriving. Consider them your experiment in becoming more fully alive. So go ahead, follow With and For, hosted by Dr. Pam King, wherever you're listening now. Hello, my friends. We're getting ready to launch another No Small Endeavor cohort set to begin in September. These have been a delight. Our cohort invites intellectually curious individuals to deeply explore what it means to live a good life, with the ultimate goal that our work together will make space for greater resilience, joy, and a vision for how to contribute meaningfully to the world around us. If you're someone who's interested in asking big questions like what sort of life is a life worth living and how am I pursuing my vision of a good life, if you're interested as well in considering those kinds of questions in light of moral philosophy, human psychology, and the social sciences, and a generous, hospitable Christian theology, then you might just be the perfect candidate. You can check out our socials or navigate to our website, nosmallendeavor.com/cohort. Again, that's nosmallendeavor.com/cohort. There you can learn more and submit an interest form. Again, that's nosmallendeavor.com/cohort. We look forward to hearing from you.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.
Are you familiar with, I don't know a whole lot about this, but the case of Myanmar and Facebook?
Yeah.
So my understanding, correct me where I'm wrong, but my understanding is that about the time the internet comes to Myanmar, basically through cell phones, smartphones, Facebook is kind of like one of the primary ways of what it means to be on the internet in Myanmar. And there's this surge of very violent language towards what a Muslim minority there by the Buddhist majority, if I understand correctly, and then tens of thousands of people are slaughtered because of the lies and the falsehoods that are propagated through Facebook. And my understanding is that the UN in their investigation, maybe even the U.S. Congress in their investigation, basically said they don't blame Facebook as such, but they definitely say that Facebook was a primary mechanism by which all of these falsehoods and the hatred was whipped up in that regard. And so I keep coming back to the power question, right? But because and it's not that I'm opposed to free speech. I'm a fan of free speech, right?
Huge fan of free speech, yeah.
But it's that I still think that it's just so complicated, and I guess I'm theoretically still not satisfied with the way it's discussed, even theoretically in the American experiment. But I don't know. What do you do with a case like that? Where should the limits have been, and where should they have been set that they weren't set?
Yeah. So your example is a good one. So in Myanmar, it's essentially the army, so a government institution that incites to genocide using Facebook. I think, and you can draw a parallel to the genocide in Rwanda in the 1990s, where radio plays a huge role in the genocide. But those kinds of statements would not be protected either under the First Amendment. You would be, if the statements that were made in Rwanda and the statements in Myanmar would not be like incitement to genocide would not be protected. And we have the further complication in the Myanmar example that it's actually the government. It's not, a private individual. It's a government institution, and obviously a government like in the United States. The government is not free to incite genocide against a certain part of the population. The interesting thing is, like, let's draw a parallel to the United States. Like, if it's the government inside a country that uses social media to incite genocide, do you then shut it off? Like, let's say that the U.S. government started inciting genocide against a specific group, or something that maybe was protected by the First Amendment, but went against the terms of service of Meta. Should Meta then block the U.S. government from using its communication tools? That would be a huge call. So in that sense, I think Rwanda, Myanmar are examples of where the lines have been crossed. The same with Julius Streicher, the editor of Der Stürmer, the most anti-Semitic newspaper in Nazi Germany. Once they came into power, the Nazis, his newspaper turned from vicious anti-Semitism into sort of murderous anti-Semitism that called for the murder of European Jews, and he was convicted and executed for that.
Do you think that last step that occurred would ever have been possible without all of the cultivation of the hatred leading up to that through the use of free speech?
We actually, it's a difficult question, but the empirical evidence that we have, and it's difficult to disentangle correlation, causation, and so on, but suggests that in democracies, at least, free speech is positively associated with more social peace. So we have some studies, for instance, that points to democracies that suppress free speech experience more terrorism. They experience more right-wing extremist violence. We also have research that is broader than democracies that suggests that people who feel that they are being repressed, their opinions are being repressed, are more likely to feel justified in using violence. In fact, we have, so when Nelson Mandela was convicted of sabotage in 1964, at a trial, he gave a very famous speech, and he explained why the ANC had gone from nonviolence to using violence in its fight against apartheid. I mean, they didn't use terrorism, but they would go after government institutions and so on. And he said, Well, initially we had used protest, dissent, and so on, but progressively the apartheid regime shut down all legal avenues for protesting. So that, I think, demonstrates what I like to call the safety valve pressure cooker theory. Free speech, when you have free speech, it acts as a safety valve for grievances. If you're unsatisfied about something, well, you have the possibility to criticize the state of affairs. You can petition the government. You can rally your citizens. You can propose change. But when you take free speech away, those grievances turn into like a pressure cooker and are much more likely to explode with violence. And I think there's some empirical evidence to support that. So that means that even if you think that you might be doing something to ensure the social peace by restricting extreme views, you might actually be prodding those who are the most likely to use violence in a more violent direction, where they feel justified to use violence because you've taken away their opportunity to say things that are nasty but that are not violent. And most of us would rather like to be called a slur than get a bullet in the back of our heads.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That reminds me of years ago, I'm forgetting who it was, I interviewed someone, and she was making the claim that there had never been a modern widespread famine in any country that had rigorous free press.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating.
Is that Amartya Sen, the Indian, I think, Nobel Prize winner, I think, had that thesis. And I mean, you could also, if you look at the countries where you have the worst outbreaks of bigoted mob violence, they tend not to be in democracies. Take a country like Pakistan, for instance. That's a country that has the death penalty for blasphemy. But it's also a country where a lot of people have been lynched for blasphemy. Like if they've said something that is being perceived to be defamatory of Islam or the Prophet, people will sometimes be lynched, be killed by people. So that suggests that these laws do not ensure tolerance. They legitimize in certain ways the religious extremist veto over speech. So in that sense, and I think it's logical in many ways that if you create a country, a society where it is normal to hear different points of view, and where it becomes normal to be able to discuss those sharp differences of view, you're going to be more tolerant. You're not going to see it as an existential threat against you that someone has different opinions than you on religion. But if you've grown up in a country that teaches its citizens that only adherence to the one true faith will ensure the survival of the country and the population, then you're much more likely to also say, well, those who have the different views, who deviate, are a cancer that must be cut off, or they contaminate the rest of society.
You guys, our conversation with Jacob was only supposed to be an hour, but then Lee and I kept on asking questions. And so we're going to split this up into 2 episodes. We will see you for the second part next week.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Subtext.
Start a conversation with your friends, your favorite group chat, or even your enemies by sharing this episode with someone who might like to discuss it with you.
Want to become a part of the conversation? DM us, DM Savannah, email us your thoughts or topic ideas at info@nosmallendeavor.com.
Leave us a review wherever you're listening and leave us 5 stars. Follow us on socials at The Subtext Show, at Savannah_Locke, and at Lee C. Camp.
Very grateful to have you as a listener.
See you next Wednesday.